Welcome back, everybody, to another YouTube edition of the Fatboyz Dynasty podcast hosted by the Fantasy Holics. Here, as always, Bo and Brant coming at you. This week, we're going to get into a little bit of some deeper dives on the division, some of the cap space issues that teams may be facing, some of the pieces that they may be trying to replace this offseason, and how they may go about doing that. This week, I know we're gonna stick with the two South divisions in the AFC and the NFC. So, without further ado, Brant, do you got anything to say before we get started on these teams?
No, over these next couple of weeks, it's going to be kind of just talking about, some breakdowns, get us ready for the draft, get us ready for free agency, talk about, what teams are going to be looking for, what possible fits there could be for those teams. Breaking down some of the salary cap. I know you're a little more in depth on the salary cap thing than me. I'm still learning exactly how that all works there. I just kind of sit there and pray and see who goes where. But yeah, we'll stick with the AFC South or both South divisions today. We're going to kick it off with the NFC South. So you want to kick us off? Or you want me to kick us off with the Atlanta?
Let's jump right into this. So I think first and foremost, it goes without saying that there's a few teams that we're going to talk about over the course of the next several weeks that have tons of salary cap money to spend, like the Chicago Bears and a team that you're going to talk about today, and another team I'll talk about today. But a lot of these teams, I think we're going to start to see that are kind of getting cash strapped. They've kind of went all in to try to win a title. Maybe it did happen for some of the teams, maybe it didn't, but it's going to leave the waters pretty murky. And why are we talking about the fantasy or the salary cap on a dynasty fantasy podcast, Brant? Well, I think it goes without saying that sometimes money can lead to massive fantasy implications. If you've got a good wide receiver on a team that works well with a quarterback, but they just have no money, and it's either the wide receiver or the quarterback, decisions are going to be made, and that decision is going to impact both the quarterback and the wide receiver in that regard. So these may not be the most sexy episodes that we put out, but they're definitely meaningful. So I'll kick the ball back over to your corner and let you get going here first with whichever one of the teams you want to go with first. But I just this isn't my favorite thing to do either, Brant. I'm sure it's not with you. Talking numbers is not, my strong suit, nor is it something that I enjoy, but it definitely does make a difference for fantasy, especially dynasty, really.
Yeah, and it really does, because like you said, I mean, you could see some big names players being cut, and like last year we saw last year the wide receivers got that huge payday. Well, the reason all the ones wanted in on that payday last year was because there's nobody this year that's out there. So they had to strike while the iron was hot. Like this year, you're going to see the running backs kind of set the market with Barkley and them. But that's really, there's only a few names of running backs out there that are going to set that market. But that's where you start seeing that salary cap come in. And I know the COVID year a couple years ago had a big issues with the salary cap and how it's changed over the past couple of years. And I think we're starting to see that hit. So you're going to see a lot of reconstruction contracts, I think, and you're going to see a lot of big names actually probably get cut this offseason. I'm going to kick it off with the Atlanta Falcons. They are, like you said, they're number 2 in salary cap. I believe it was where did I put that down? Either way, they're number 2 in the amount of salary cap that they have to spend. It's 55 million is roughly what they're at. And one of their biggest needs in my mind is an edge rusher. They only had, I think it was 21 sacks is what I got out of them. And there's some players that were up there pretty close to that. So they're going to have to spend their draft picks and probably some of their money beefing up that defense. I think their needs are really edge rusher and a number 2 corner. They only had 10 interceptions this year. So that's going to be a rough thing for them to have to address with their salary cap. And for fantasy wise, I think they need another number 2 wide receiver, as the shipment of Calvin Ridley out the door over to Jacksonville is going to free up a little bit of cap space for him too. But really right now you're looking at your roster and you got Tyler Algier in your backfield. And I know there's a few more other names that I know I'm missing. You got Drake London and Kyle Pitts are really the only 2 names, pass catchers, left on your roster. Zacchaeus is going to be a big free agent that's leaving probably. And we talked just pre-show, you think was it Caleb McGeary will probably get the franchise tag through your team. So Atlanta's not losing a whole lot of big name players that are going to be on the market that are going to be fantasy wise. But you got to think about it. They really didn't have a whole lot of big name players that were fantasy impacts this year outside of, Kyle Pitts and Drake London. So in my mind, they're going to use their money, and I think they're going to have to use their money on their defense. I think they're going to have to use the draft. They have 7 picks in total, 8 picks in total. I'm sorry. They have a first, a second, a third, 2 fourths, a fifth, and 2 sevenths. So yeah, they're going to have to use those draft picks to really help that offense out in my mind. And I think they're going to have to focus mainly a lot of that money on the defense because there's not a whole lot of big names coming out on free agency that's going to fill those voids that they need.
Yeah, most definitely. It is worth noting too, and the only reason I know this, not because I studied or anything else, I just it's my team. So if Marcus Mariota happens to be cut, which it sounds like he's going to be by the Falcons, that will get them up to around 64 million in available cap, which is always nice. Nothing in comparison to what the Chicago Bears have. We'll talk about them in a few weeks. Yeah, Bray, I have to be honest. This is not my most appealing free agent market I've ever seen as far as big names that are going to make a huge difference in a lot of spaces. It seems like at every position almost there's kind of an alpha, and then the class kind of drops off a little bit behind them, with the exception of the running back pool. There's some pretty good quarterbacks out there as well. But like when you talk about non-skill, non-fantasy positions where it's just going to make the team as a whole better, when you get like one of those nasty dudes in the trenches on one of the side of the ball, it's still really not that deep for that aspect either. There's some good tackles out there, a couple good guards on the defensive side. It's the same thing. So I expect a lot of teams to either make some trades, like Denver's putting some of their studs up there on the trade market. We had talked about that one day, you and I, last week with them and some of the names that they were talking about, or potentially through the draft. But as an Atlanta Falcons fan, I'm not necessarily as excited about this offseason as I was last, even though we have all that money and we got out from Matt Ryan's contract.
Yeah, I know we talked about this, and I know that you've kind of turned your nose up to it. One of the biggest rumors surrounding you guys right now is Lamar Jackson coming to Atlanta. We know we saw you guys try to go all in on the Deshaun Watson thing last year, and the big old Instagram photo that fell through and everything else. So the real question is, does your front office go all in for Lamar Jackson like they did last year, or do they just sit back and try to just play the field? Because, well, now it looks like Daniel Jones might be out there too, another guy that Jimmy G, we talked about the free agent quarterbacks, and it sounded like more and more might end up being out there on the market due to the fact they can't reach an agreement with their team that they're with now.
Yeah, I think the Falcons will have to do their due diligence and at least call and see what Lamar's availability is if they don't happen to get a deal done prior to whatever. But I don't expect Atlanta to do it. It sounded like last year, listening to all the beat reporters and everybody way closer to the organization than I am as just a fanatic on Sundays. It sounded like it was the owner, Arthur Blank, making the push for Deshaun Watson last year. But he's already publicly come out and, basically patted Desmond Ridder on the back this offseason, talking about how good Desmond Ridder looked through 4 games last year, how big it was that he didn't have any turnovers, things of that nature. So, he's kind of already on record coming out and tipping his cap to Desmond Ridder. So I'd be really shocked if they did something. I would not be shocked if the rumors don't continue to heat up. And I do think Atlanta will call.
Okay. All right.
Let's move right on along in the NFC South, moving down to one of my least favorite teams in all of football, just because the rivalry is so real. In the New Orleans Saints, this cap space is just ungodly awful. They're currently negative $46 million in dead cap space right now. So they've got some considerable work to do this offseason. And they already have some pretty notable free agents, likely to leave, especially when you consider, money like that. And a lot of them they're really losing a lot of guys on both sides of the ball. Bradley Robley, Marcus Davenport, David Onyemata. Those are all three starters from the defensive side of the ball for them last year. And then if you go to the offensive side of the ball, they're losing Jarvis Landry, Andy Dalton, Mark Ingram, and Juwan Johnson. Now, Brandon, if you remember all the way back to week 4 on this very podcast where you and I called the breakout of Juwan Johnson and how good of a fantasy season he had as a tight end. He finished top 10 there in New Orleans and helped a lot of folks out that didn't have one of those big name tight ends. He's a free agent. So I don't know how New Orleans is going to be able to do anything in free agency. Honestly, they've done tons of cap restructures. They're working through deals with other guys. I know they worked on Michael Thomas's deal, and they've done some things. However, they have 7 draft picks in this draft, so that's not a ton either. And 5 of those 7 picks are after or pick 115 or later in the draft. So it's not even necessarily guaranteed to be difference makers in the draft either. I think the NFC South is going to be comfortably the worst division in football again next year, as much as it pains me to say that as an Atlanta Falcons fan. I just, when you look at this team and the other one I'm getting ready to talk about here in a minute, the cap space is just so pungent. I'm not sure how these teams can pick themselves up. I was super interested to see that, there was the rumors, a few weeks back about Derek Carr being traded to the Saints from Las Vegas. And I could have seen that being a way for New Orleans to work some of their cap space issues out. Maybe, sending Taysom Hill's contract and maybe even Alvin Kamara back to Vegas for Vegas to cut, whatever the case may be. But, that didn't come out. Derek Carr, ended up being a free agent. And that very well may be because he wants to go to New Orleans. He had 2 visits with him. Maybe he loves it. And it was like, I'm not going to help my former team to hurt my current team, kind of a thing. Like he didn't want New Orleans to have to give up picks to Vegas to get him when he could just go sign there. So maybe there's some crazy way New Orleans can work their salary cap. And it happens every year. I mean, listen, there's going to be a fielded team in New Orleans, right? Like the NFL is not going to allow them to trot out like a backup quarterback from the XFL or the USFL out there and be horrible for ratings. Like no shade thrown at PJ Walker, but you're not going to see the NFL do this with the New Orleans Saints or any other team. They're going to have something happen. And then one last piece of note here, Brant, and then I'm going to let you chime in on the New Orleans Saints. The Alvin Kamara situation is coming to a head as well. The indictments were filed last week, indicting him and 2 others for his role in they call it an assault. I'll call it more of a bar fight, even though I wasn't there nor a lawyer. But it seems like it was a bar fight after the Pro Bowl last year in Vegas. But he was indicted. A lot of people thought the suspension was going to come this year because of how backed up the courts were last year, especially in Vegas. So there's a ton of talk out there, just like Joe Mixon with Cincinnati. There's a lot of talk that Alvin Kamara gets cut. It would save New Orleans around $6 million in cap money. So it's something that I definitely see that New Orleans could do. And again, there's one back on the roster there, and it's Eno Benjamin. So definitely something to pay attention to.
Yeah, definitely. David, I know David Johnson at one point was on their roster too last year.
He's also a free agent this year.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm assuming he's probably a free agent. He probably signed a 1-year deal. But yeah, New Orleans had the same issue last year. They were in cap devastation last year, and they're in it again this year. I wouldn't be surprised to see, Alvin Kamara either getting a reconstructed contract, getting cut, Michael Thomas being on the move. As for Derek Carr, in my mind, and this is just kind of my opinion on it, he did have 2 visits, and I just don't know if they're able to work anything in order to pay him. So they were like, well, you're going to have to go to free agency and then maybe we can work something out. So that's kind of where I was at with that when they kind of just let him walk. I know he's also had 2 visits with the Jets, which we will talk about the Jets later on. So it'll be interesting to see the Derek Carr situation and how Derek Carr can actually affect the whole NFL by being able to sign prior to the actual free agency. So as for New Orleans, I think that they're going to have to do some drastic moves. I don't even know if they have enough cap room to sign any of their rookies. They may have to just give up all 7 picks and call it a good day. So it will be interesting to see the whole New Orleans shake out. And like you said, they're not going to trot out. They're not going to trot out Taysom Hill as their quarterback. They're going to go get a real quarterback. I know Jameis Winston, I believe, is still under contract. So they'll trot somebody out there and ask for the rest.
Would you not rather have Taysom Hill than Jameis Winston at this point, though? Have you not seen enough Jameis?
I've seen enough Taysom Hill.
That's fair. All right, that's fair.
So actually, I'm going to roll in this. So your whole NFC South, and I'm going to call it yours because you have the Falcons there. You guys are the only ones that are above the cap. You guys are the only ones that are good to go and do some real good moves. This Carolina, they're over the cap limit by $9,562,000 over. I got a little more specific on theirs as I was looking at it. So they're gonna be rough, and they need a quarterback because the biggest names that are walking off their team is Sam Darnold and Devontae Foreman. So those are two decent names that are coming off. So you could see DJ Moore being a trade piece in order to free up some space. We saw them trade CMC in order to free up some space and try to help out in the rebuild. PJ Walker's also out the door. So really, I'm going to draw a blank on this. Ole Miss quarterback, Matt Corral, I think.
Maybe PJ Walker will be the starter of New Orleans. I didn't know he was a free agent.
Yeah. I think Matt Corral's the only QB on Carolina's roster right now. They have a backup QB there somewhere that's, the emergency one. So maybe they might have him. We got to see. But really that's their biggest needs are on the offensive side of the ball. And that's QB and tight end. And tight end really is because their new coach, Frank Wright, coming over from Indianapolis. But he really likes to use the tight ends. We saw that in Indy last year where he targeted the tight ends a lot in the end zone and to move the ball down the field. So they're really going to need a tight end to help out down there. They have 7 draft picks, a first, 2 seconds, a third, a fourth, or 2 fourths, and a fifth. So Carolina's going to be using their draft picks to really beef up that offense in my mind. The only real downfall, that defense looked pretty decent last year, but the downfall to that defense was another cornerback. They're going to need another cornerback to really help ease up the pass or ease up the passing over the top of them. So I see Carolina using their picks to beef up because they're not going to have the money to go after a Saquon Barkley or a Josh Jacobs or a David Montgomery to fill their backfield. That might be all Chuba next year. Maybe, Chuba and some random they draft in the 4th or 5th round. So they'll be interesting to see with Carolina. So it'd be interesting to see what they do with the cuts. I kind of want to see DJ Moore get cut and see what he can actually do in a good offense with a capable quarterback, but Lord knows if he gets cut, he'll probably wind up in Houston or something like that with only Lord knows who throwing the football, or down there in Arizona with little tiny Kyler Murray throwing the ball over a big old line. But yeah, as for Carolina, they're going to be they're not going to be any fun to watch this offseason. And for you Carolina fans, I'm sorry, but you're probably going to see some big names getting cut off your team and some decent names walking away from that team. And I say decent just because PJ Walker and Devontae Foreman, because I'm definitely not putting Sam Darnold in that realm there. So it'll be interesting to see what Carolina does, but I think that they're going to have to spend their drafts to get on that offense and have to use the little bit of money that they can free up to help out their defense the best they can.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, like you said, the NFC South, with the exception of the Atlanta Falcons, there's just no money to be had here. There already wasn't a lot of talent in this division to begin with, and now there's no talent and no money. So this may be the division to point and laugh at for a few years here as these teams try to get their way through these murky waters. Speaking of murky waters, Brant, did you know that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers no longer have a starting quarterback? If you believe that Tom Brady retired for this,
Kyle Trask, baby.
5th, 6th, somewhere around there. He's retired again. And to make matters even worse, did you know that Tampa Bay has, they are currently 56 million over the cap threshold?
Yeah, I did see that while I was looking. Did you know they signed a quarterback coach to coach nobody? Apparently.
Well, Blaine Gabbert is also a free agent. He's about the biggest one on offense, unless you count decrepit old Julio Jones. Again, no disrespect, love Julio, but he's a shell of his former self on offense. Defensively, they're going to be missing some stuff. Levante David, Akeem Hicks, William Golston, and Sean Bunting, all guys that were part of that Super Bowl winning defense 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 3 years ago. Yeah, the Rams won it last year, right? So, yeah, these are all starters from that defense, all contributing factors to that defense that are going to be free agents. And again, how do you replace those guys when you're 55 million in the hole? They do have 9 draft picks, 1 first, 1 second, 1 third, 2 fifths, 2 sixths, 2 sevenths. So there's some picks in there, and Tampa Bay's done it, especially as of late, done a good job hitting their draft picks. So I think they're going to get some guys here. So I expect them to be okay, but I don't expect them to get the next Tom Brady in this draft. It also sounds like the rumblings out of Tampa Bay, or that Kyle Trask is just having a hell of a time grasping onto an NFL offense. It doesn't sound like he's anywhere near ready to walk on the field as a starter. So this is definitely a team to watch. That'll be really fun to see who's the quarterback there next year, because this one genuinely could be PJ Walker. There's not a lot of money. I know everybody says it makes too much sense for Derek Carr to go there. I just don't understand how you get Derek Carr in the door when you're 56 million over the salary cap. I know one thing they've talked about, and this one has fantasy implications big time. They've definitely talked about dumping Leonard Fournette's contract, making him a cap cut. Which would free up some money. Obviously, Rachaad White looked like he was good enough to carry the load last year, especially down the stretch when they were basically a 50-50 timeshare. But however, Leonard Fournette getting cut is a fantasy sticking point, if you will. That's definitely something that's going to have implications. Obviously no Tom Brady, and we don't know who's coming in the door at quarterback again because they have no money. You don't know what that's going to look like for guys like Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, Cade Otton, these guys that have caught the ball for the last couple of years from Tom Brady, who have been amazing for fantasy. We're not going to have that next year. So it'll definitely be interesting to see. And I know there's going to be some people that are going to say, well, Tom Brady wasn't Tom Brady this year. I agree. But nonetheless, if it's Kyle Trask, it's going to be worse than what Tom Brady could have ever been this year.
Yeah, I know I said they hired a new QB coach who was a new offensive coordinator, Dave Canales from Seattle, and that had some rumors going with Geno Smith possibly following him. I know Geno came out and said that he wanted him to stay in Seattle as the QB coach, and well, he left for Tampa Bay, and there's a possibility of Geno going to Tampa Bay. That's some rumblings coming out. So you could see Geno down there in Tampa Bay, which once again is not a lateral over from what you had. So Tampa Bay is going to be a team that, they went all in to win that Super Bowl 3 years ago. And now they're paying the piper for that one. And that's going to be a few years to rebuild. I know they just signed Chris Godwin last offseason to a decent contract. So it'll be interesting to see what Tampa Bay does. They have great pieces on the team still. They're losing a bunch of great pieces, but you ain't got no money. So Tampa Bay is going to be a team that, in my mind, is going to take a huge, drastic fall off the cliff. We saw a little bit of that last year, and I think it might be even worse next year. Excuse me. So let's move over to the AFC South. Unless you got anything else you want to add about the NFC South before we jump straight over.
Listen, I think the state of Florida, I'm going to have to look into Miami, but I've got 2 of the teams in Florida that I'm going to talk about tonight with myself. There's just so much dead money in that state that, the NFL you look out, they may look to expand to Canada or something and strip these Florida teams of their teams because that there's no money being made in Florida, not off cap space anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's jump over to the AFC South. And with the first team there, I got the Indianapolis Colts. And they are in desperate need of a quarterback. No offense to Mr. Matt Ryan. I know you and me both had high hopes for him going into Indy last season. It just didn't pan out. But I think they really need a quarterback and they need a wide receiver. They have a top 10 pick in order to possibly get a quarterback. I would definitely consider them to be a team to see in the talk of trading up into the top 3 in order to go get a QB. So with Indy, their biggest loss on offense is really Paris Campbell. It's not a whole lot of loss on the offensive side. And then they have a defensive end, Yannick. I'm not even going to try his last name. He was 13. Yeah. He was 13 mil. He is also a free agent. But that defense is so young and built up. They have so much already invested in them. I know they had some injury concerns this past season, but that defense, you just kind of need to leave alone and let them gel. No, they added Shane Steichen, the OC from Philly, as their new head coach, and we saw what he could do with Jalen Hurts, where he was able to change the playbook up from Carson Wentz to or be part of the change from Carson Wentz to Jalen Hurts. So I think he'll adapt very well to whatever quarterback they end up with. This is a place I would love to see Derek Carr. And then let them invest that top 10 pick in one of these stud wide receivers coming out. There's only a few names, but I think they have to get a number 2 to go opposite of Michael Pittman. Obviously, what was there was not the answer. They need to go back to what they do best, and that is lean on Jonathan Taylor. And they did just sign a new OC. I think that came today, and Jim Bob Cooter is back and in a meaningful position as he settled for, I think it was Philly consultant last season, but he's back in an actual spot. Indianapolis is a team that I see being a player in one of these quarterback markets. I know that they're 10 mil over the cap limit, so it's going to be a little hard for them. They do have 7 draft picks. They have 1 in every single round. They don't have doubles in any rounds. But I expect them to be a player in the QB draft market, and if not in the free agent QB. But I think maybe they're done with the veteran quarterbacks. Matt Ryan didn't pan out. Carson Wentz didn't pan out. So I expect them to go back to their identity, lean on Jonathan Taylor, beef up that O-line a little bit more, and probably invest that early draft pick in a quarterback. And then their second round should probably be a wide receiver in my mind. Like I said, they need to leave the defense alone and just let them work, let them gel, let them get back to what they were 2 years ago. And I think Indy is still going to be one of the teams to talk about at the top of that AFC South.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said here with Indianapolis, Brant. I definitely think they're a quarterback needy team, but I genuinely think they're a quarterback away on offense. I don't think they necessarily have that number 1 bona fide stud like a Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase.
Right.
Michael Pittman's not that, but Michael Pittman's a comfortable number 1. I think we saw some flashes of brilliance out of Alec Pierce last year, especially late. Had a couple good touchdown catches late. And then we saw the emergence of Jelani Woods, who I think is going to be an absolute nightmare in that offense moving forward. There with that rookie tight end, and then of course you've got Jonathan Taylor. So I genuinely do think this team is I would say I agree with you, a complimentary wide receiver. I would love to see like a guy like Zay Flowers end up here, who would play like a traditional slot role for Indianapolis, have Alec Pierce and Michael Pittman on the outside. But I think all the wide receivers in Indy right now are pretty shifty, that you can move around pretty good. They also have that Ashton Doolin or whatever.
He is a free agent as well.
Okay. I was going to say he looked pretty good in spots last year as well. But yeah, I definitely think they're a quarterback away. And who knows, maybe Alec Pierce is even better if the quarterback play is better than what it was last year, because we know that wasn't anything to write home about, even though, like you had mentioned, you and I were both very excited about Matt Ryan and being in Indy. It just never came to fruition. So I definitely think, just like you said, Derek Carr makes too much sense there. So does a guy like Jimmy G. That'd be a great fit for one of those guys. But at the same time, man, they've done this quarterback grab bag every year for several years, and it's just not worked out. Eventually Jim Irsay is going to say, you know what, let's just draft one and see what happens. Because if you go back a few years in the draft and you go back, I don't know, what was it, 2004 or something like that, when Peyton Manning was drafted, maybe in a little earlier. And then, the next quarterback they drafted after that, Andrew Luck, 2 pretty good quarterbacks for Indy. So they have some success with younger guys. I could see him wanting to go back and grab one. And Will Levis, CJ Stroud, Bryce Young, whoever they could end up getting in this draft, I think would be huge for Indy. So Moving right along into the AFC South, this one I'm not going to spend much time talking about. It's the Jacksonville Jaguars. They are $37 million over the cap right now. As far as notable free agents, they've got a couple key pieces on their defensive line that are stepping away or moving into free agency, not stepping away, excuse me. But they rotated their defensive line so much, just like a lot of teams do. Nothing of huge impact there. Offensively, they lost Evan Ingram and Marvin Jones. Evan Ingram would be a huge hit based on what he did this year. He was by far and away one of their better weapons down the stretch. Marvin Jones Jr., not so much, like another former Detroit Lions wide receiver that just didn't get much love on their current team, that we won't bring up Kenny Galladay on this episode. But nonetheless, this team has 9 picks in the draft, 5 in the first 4 rounds. They have 2 fourths, so a first, second, third, fourth, first, second, third, 2 fourths, a fifth, sixth, seventh. And I think they will address a lot of their needs here in the draft. And then again, the biggest shot in the arm that this team could potentially get, which I think they truly need, an alpha wide receiver. They have some very good ones in Christian Kirk and Zay Jones. We saw those guys look great this year, but the offense still needs an alpha and an identity, if you will. And I think Trevor Lawrence takes that further step with Calvin Ridley if his reinstatement goes through. I know he applied last week on the first day he was eligible to apply. That team has got so many good pieces on defense, so many good pieces on offense. I genuinely think that Jacksonville is on the verge of being a perennial playoff team. I won't necessarily say that they're on the verge of being a perennial contender. I think we need to see Trevor Lawrence take another step forward. But, this is one of the few teams that I think I'm going to talk about this offseason that doesn't have cap space that I'm genuinely not too worried about. I like Travis Etienne in the backfield. I like the wide receivers they have now. I like the addition of Calvin Ridley for Trevor Lawrence. The defense has been improving each and every year, well coached under Doug Peterson. I just don't really have a whole lot to say about Jacksonville, Brant.
Yeah, with Jacksonville, I'm in the same boat as you. That's a young team, and they've built it through the draft, through trading, their veterans, getting plenty of draft picks. I know they're starting to get back to only having their own, as you said. But yeah, no, Jacksonville's a team that we talked about it last year, how it was the New York Jets to the moon when fantasy-wise came around. And I think that Jacksonville might be in the cards for us later, talking about their fantasy stock to the moon. We'll just have to wait and see what all happens there. We know that they already had a lot of notable, fantasy pieces, but Jacksonville is a team that's been fun over the last few years. I know they've, great coaching 2 years ago, and they've been fun over the last 2 years and our last few years, and they're going to continue to be fun watching this team rebuild with the youth that they have.
Brant, listen, I mean, when it comes to my money, I'm already willing to put Trevor Lawrence, especially in startup leagues, as a top 10 quarterback to be drafted in Dynasty Startup. I'm willing to put, Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, and Calvin Ridley in the top 50 wide receivers to be drafted in a startup. And I'm willing to put ETN in the top 15 and running backs in a startup just because of the age here. I'm willing to say right now that I'm getting on board this rocket ship blasting off for, hell, this may go past the moon. We may be on the way to Mars here with this team. But I'm willing to get on record and say it right now. There's too much here that I like. I'm not sure I'm going to get you in agreement today, but this very well could surpass the Jets' fantasy relevancy that we expected last year this coming season with the Jags.
So we're going to go from one of your or one of the younger teams in the NFL to one of the older teams in the NFL, and that's the Tennessee Titans. You got Derrick Henry, who's just a monster in the backfield. I don't know if you can ever slow him down. I don't know if age is a thing for him. We know we've seen him get banged up the last 2 years, miss a game or two here and there. But as for Tennessee, they are $23 million over the cap, so they're not going to do a whole lot in free agency. They need to reset their offensive line. In my mind, I know they had the injury to Tyler Lewan, so they need to reset that offensive line for Derrick Henry to give some help with the rush. They were in the bottom. I think they were in the bottom 10 of rush efficiency for their offensive line. I know Derrick Henry didn't make it look like that, but when you get 30 carries a game, it's not that hard to really get 100 yards if you only average about 3.5 yards per carry, or you break off a 70-yard run by yourself, pretty much. But yeah, they're losing some notable pieces. I'm gonna put you on the spot here. So they're losing Austin Hooper and Swamman, the tight end. Have we learned it yet? Have we learned the name that's on the roster? Nope.
No.
We're still saying Okinawa or whatever. So he's still there. Cowabunga, I think, is what we were calling him. Cowabunga is still there in the tight end spot, and we saw him have a decent season. I expect Ryan Tannehill to be a cut, and I expect him to be a player in either the development of Malik Willis next year. They really, really need to add another wide receiver in my mind, opposite of Treylon Burks.
You ready for this? Here's my attempt at it.
All right.
Chig, first name Chig, Onkokwo. That was horrible, but that was my attempt.
All right, that's
OKONKWO.
It was like me with Cook up there in Minnesota. It took me a few years to get it right.
Also a tough name.
Yeah, very, very tough. But yeah, Tennessee.
That was Singletary too, by the way.
Yeah. Well, I just put them both together. I just wanted them both combined with our powers combined. But yeah, notably on offense, they're losing Austin Hooper. They're losing Dontrell Hilliard, and they're losing Nick Westbrook there, the wide receiver. So they have to add another wide receiver opposite of Treylon Burks. They can't expect him to be the only guy, because if he's going to be the only guy catching the ball, it's easy to cover that if there's nobody else there to catch the ball. They have to add somebody else. I know Robert Woods is still there, but he's almost a shell of what he was there in Los Angeles. I know that one hits you harder. Bo, I know you traded for him, and he hasn't been what he used to be. But yeah, you gotta. In my mind, they have to attack with their 6 picks that they have. They need to attack finding Derrick Henry's replacement or his backup, and possibly attack another quarterback. But Tennessee's a team that really they want to be run first. They have to find a wide receiver to help out with that, to be, a blocking wide receiver and also be able to catch the ball. They got to beef up that O-line. I expect them to attack the offense with their draft picks this year, because they don't have a whole lot of cap space. They don't have any cap space to be playing around in the free agent market. I do believe Tannehill is not going to be there next year. But how they get rid of him or what they use to get rid of him is all waited to be seen. But that's also, once again, just in my opinion. But I expect he'll be a cap casualty. And I'd like to see Malik Willis succeed. But, I mean, what did he do? Throw 8-9 passes every game he did start last year. So we didn't get to see a whole lot of him. Tennessee's a team that's not going to be fun during free agency, but they will be fun during the draft to see what kind of plays they make, possibly moving Tannehill during the draft or anything else.
Yeah, I think there's a chance that Tennessee may slowly start to fade out. They're kind of in control of that division for a little while here, and I think you're going to see that tide slowly turn to that it's turned to the Jacksonville Jaguars, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's Jacksonville and Indy right now, because I think Indy has a nice young core. Got to find a quarterback.
Yeah, Brant, there's another team that's about to have a really nice young core, and that is the Houston Texans. Under the gun of the first-year head coach DeMarco Ryan, former 49ers defensive coordinator, coming here into Houston. Now, Houston, again, similarly to Atlanta, is about the only team in its division that's got some money to waggle around out there. They've got $37 million, give or take, right now to go play around with. I went through their list of notable free agents. I went through their list of entire free agents. And Brant, oddly enough, next to notable free agents, I have written down none of note. It was kind of like Rex Burkhead. There just wasn't a whole lot of relevancy on either side of the ball there.
I'm looking at it, and the only one that sticks out to me is Jordan Atkins. He was a valuable tight end for them later in the season, but he's not anything that you can't replace. That might be the only name.
You named a better name on Tennessee available on free agency than Akins. So, in Austin Hooper, who's been relevant at least at his time in Atlanta. But I digress. The Houston Texans, not only do they have plenty of money to throw around a little bit in free agency, they also have 11 draft picks. in this draft, including the number 2 overall, which a lot of people speculate. Obviously, that's going to be a quarterback. I believe they have the number 2 and the number 18, or the number 12, excuse me, the number 2 and the number 12. And a lot of people think that they're going to go ahead and just go quarterback and wide receiver and pair, a tandem together there for this foreseeable future. So we know that means that Nico Collins is still going to be there, but what does that mean for Brandon Cooks? I think Brandon Cooks is gone. Obviously, he got pulled up in front of everybody last year at a team meeting. They stripped the captain's patch off his jersey. He kind of said he didn't want to be there. He wanted traded. Nothing came. They didn't cut him. I don't expect Brandon Cooks to be on the Texans, coming down to September next year, but that could be interesting to see. But I'm very intrigued with the Houston Texans. I'm not, anywhere near saying, Houston Texans, they don't even have a rocket ship built right now, Brant, to go to the moon. They're slowly accumulating chairs and seat belts and steering wheels and, flashing lights and panels and buzzers and all the other high-tech stuff that I'm not near smart enough to name on a rocket ship. But, really, I'm looking at, the team that from last year, and, Davis Mills, I think, is obviously going to be replaced. I think, Nico Collins will be replaced as the 1. I think Nico Collins may be a serviceable number 2, depending on who the quarterback becomes. I'm not sold on Dameon Pierce either. If you're Houston and you're sitting there and you're saying, let's commit to this quarterback, let's go out and let's get him good picks and weapons, and you're sitting there and you've got, let's say they get one of these top 3 wide receivers in Quentin Johnson, Jordan Addison, or Jackson Smith and Jigba at the 12, and then they're sitting there with the number 2 pick in the second round, and it's like, oh, Jahmyr Gibbs hasn't been taken yet, or oh, for some reason Bijan Robinson hasn't been drafted yet. You're going to tell me that they're going to pass on talent like that because they have a guy like Dameon Pierce in the backfield? I'm not sold on that. There's a new head coach in town. That means that he doesn't have to be sold on it yet. I know I was the last one to get on the Dameon Pierce hype train last year, Brant. I think I'm the first one stepping off of it. But Houston, I think, is going to be a just incredibly fun team to watch this offseason.
Yeah, Houston, like you said, I was late to the Dameon Pierce. Got on it a lot quicker than you did, but I was a little late to it. It was as his draft capital started flying up the draft boards. But yeah, I don't see how they can just say that that's the right piece. I mean, he was what, a 3rd, 4th round draft. So I'm not sold on it. Like you said, there's too many decent names out there. They have too many draft picks, and maybe we're missing something completely, and that they do see something in him. But I think he's a serviceable number 2 back, so they can later in the draft. But that's to be seen. The wide receivers are definitely going to be fun to watch to see what they do with that team. Like you said, Brandon Cooks should have been out the door before this year's trade deadline, and they didn't want to move him. They didn't want him to get what he wanted, so they're going to wait. But yeah, he's definitely going to be out the door this offseason in my mind because, well, they could use some more cap money to throw around too.
Absolutely. So, that kind of moves us through the AFC and NFC South today. Next week, we're coming at you with the NFC West and the AFC West. So some fun teams there. Brant will be into your division a little bit. Again, these episodes, today's episode, the next 3 aren't going to be necessarily sexy. Again, like we alluded to, but they definitely have some fantasy relevancy to them. Especially when it comes to, guys being cap cuts, because, if you're walking into a dynasty season and you're, maybe, that's the beautiful thing about dynasty leagues, in my opinion, is there's no off time. So maybe you're holding Leonard Fournette this offseason and you're thinking, well, what do I move him for? Maybe anything, because he's potentially a cap cut and he could go to a worse situation. Let it be somebody else's headache. So when you hear that, a team like Tampa Bay is $55 million over the cap, kind of lends itself to the idea that, yeah, you're probably right. Leonard Fournette's probably cut. So, like I said, you can let him, get a 3rd round rookie pick out of him, which seems low, but let it be somebody else's headache to worry about who he's playing for next year.
Yeah, it's and also these episodes are also good for as we talk about Leonard Fournette being a camp cut, or a cap cut is going out and trying to get Rashad White on the cheaper end while Fournette is still there. Last year I invested in Gainwell. I know it wasn't the smartest idea at that time, but there's a lot of times where you talk about a certain wide receiver or a certain running back that's going to get cut, and you're pretty sure he's going to, and you go grab his backup. So I mean, or you keep an eye on it and try to get him for the cheap, or even try to get that package deal. And that way you end up with possibly two starting running backs. Like if Barkley's out the door, I'm not sure who his backup is right now, but Montgomery, prime example, is officially a free agent as of today, I believe it was. So Khalil Herbert is a guy that if you have, you get a hold on to. We'll talk about that more. But yeah, I mean that's one of the reasons you listen to this stuff and all that is so you get a head start on that. Try to get people cheap. Samaje Perine a guy that comes to my mind when it comes to cheap.
Yeah, and you brought up the Kenneth Gainwell thing when you got him, Brand. That's the thing you got to remember with Dynasty, especially because it's not just a redraft. You got to look and see, like, okay, who's the backup if this guy gets cut? Who's the backup if this guy doesn't resign? Because that could have relevancy. And the important thing to remember with a Dynasty league is a Dynasty league, you don't win a trade as soon as both parties click accept. Sure, there may be an initial winner on paper, but it really takes weeks or if not years to see how a dynasty trade plays out. So, you traded Kenneth Gainwell, and I'm not going to put you on the spot to ask what you gave up for him or whatever. But, if Kenneth Gainwell ends up the starting running back for the Philadelphia Eagles next year, which there's some possibility of that, regardless of what you gave up on the other end of it, you may have won that trade by a landslide.
Well, we'll just say I moved Laviska Shenault and some other pieces for Gainwell, and then moved Gainwell in a trade. I believe that was the trade where I acquired Amon-Ra St. Brown. So I'm going to say I won that one on paper so far.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. but nonetheless, the dynasty landscape so unique that if you can make a trade and have that instant seller's remorse where it's instantly you're regretful, you feel like you made a bad trade, whatever, and a player goes out and for 3 weeks they're just duds. And you just kick yourself, and then all of a sudden they're Christian Watson and they're blowing through the roof. That was when I made a trade for Christian Watson in the offseason at our rookie draft, if you remember. And for several weeks was kicking myself. I sent Calvin Ridley straight up for Christian Watson, and was kicking myself for that one. And then Christian Watson happened, and it was nothing but smiles. So, you got to just wait and see how these trades play out long term in a dynasty league. So next week we'll be back at you with the AFC and NFC West. Definitely looking forward to getting into those teams next week. Hopefully we see a little bit more cap money in those teams, but I have my doubts.
Got to be somewhere.
Got to be somewhere. Somebody's hoarding all the money.
Yeah.
It's like Monopoly, right? Somebody's got it. It's out there somewhere.
Yeah. It's rough this season when literally only half the teams are under the cap limit. So it's rough to find this offseason.
Absolutely.
But I think that sums it up for us this week. And as always, stay hungry
and stay fat, my friends.